think we can do that.
Jeff, and we're rolling.
So just for our own purposes, if you could state your name and spell it so we have correct spelling, George?
I'm George K. Heartwell, George, middle initial K. Heartwell is Heartwell, Mayor of Grand Rapids, Michigan.
And for purposes of when we do sort of the lower third, do you want us to have Mayor Heartwell, Reverend Heartwell, just George Heartwell? What would you prefer?
It really makes little difference to me, whatever
Okay.
works best for you. And
Okay.
you know, if you want to call me Rev, or if you want to call me Mayor,
Okay.
either is fine.
Okay, great. All right, well, let's maybe start off with, you were on the Grand Rapids City Commission at the time that the, first the Community Relations Commission sort of recommended that gender identity be included in the anti-discrimination ordinance that the city had at the time. And so it was first introduced in '91, and then eventually it was passed in '94. I'm just wondering from your own recollection as being an elected official in a commissioner capacity at that time, what do you recall about how the public was sort of, and how the commission itself was sort of navigating the issue of whether or not to include gender orientation to the anti-discrimination ordinance of the city?
Well, I was a fresh new commissioner in 1991 when as I recall, Linda Samuelson and I introduced the ordinance amendment. It had come out of, however, a lot of discussion that went on before that. I remember Third Ward Commissioner and my predecessor, Bill Blickley, had been involved in the discussion and had negotiated with the Community Relations Commission a language change in the proposed ordinance that they were looking at. So sexual orientation was in the original language. Commissioner Blickley had negotiated a gender orientation, which he felt was a softer term that meant the same thing, that could perhaps win community support. Commissioner Blickley retired, left the commission. I came on and filled that seat, and it wasn't long, as I recall, sometime in the summer, early summer, spring or summer of '91, that Commissioner Samuelson and I brought this forward following the recommendation of the Community Relations Commission. It was preparatory to that. There was a relatively small group, I would say, from the LGBT community that had been working quietly with the Community Relations Commission, with city staff, and that it was not a powerhouse group in any sense. It was really kind of a quiet initiative. The response, the vitriolic response to its introduction, I don't suppose surprised any of us, but in its scope and its magnitude were I would say rather stunning. Remembering a public hearing that had to be moved from the city commission chambers over to the convention center, where we would have a hall large enough to accommodate all the people who came out. The public hearing that went on for hours and hours, almost without, I don't want to say without exception, but largely people who were upset, angry, in opposition to adopting this ordinance language. It was. There were those brave souls who came forward and spoke in favor, and then the commission had its discussion after these several hours of public hearing. We had our discussion, and it was quite interesting because we knew that there were three of us that supported it. Then Mayor John Logie, then Commissioner Linda Samuelson, and me. And we knew that there were three that were solidly opposed to it, and the one that we weren't certain about was Commissioner Lou Merriweather. And to tell you the truth, even after our debate, as the mayor called for the vote, none of us were certain where Commissioner Merriweather stood on the question. But when the votes were cast and counted, his was among those opposing, and it failed on a 4-3 vote. The rest of the story is that, if you want me to go on, unless you want to ask questions, Jeff, but
Well, maybe before we talk about the actual passing of it, adopting of it in '94, I was at that hearing in '91 when that vote was taken, and I remember writing about it and listening to again, hours of commentary, and I would concur that there was a lot of heated debate, and people were not sort of neutral or moderate in their opposition necessarily.
yeah. And most troubling to me were the clergy that came forward and spoke in opposition.
That was going to be my question. And as yourself, as an ordained minister, how did you react to this sort of very visceral opposition? Kind of using their own theological arguments against including that kind of language into the ordinance.
Well, I come from, I'm ordained today in the tradition that I grew up in, the United Church of Christ, which is certainly the progressive wing of the Christian faith today. At the time, I was ordained in the Reformed Church in America, which interestingly, on the one hand, stated in its policy statements that homosexuality is sin. On the other hand, stated very clearly that by policy adopted by the church as a whole, that people of faith ought to be on the side of civil rights and human rights, including advocating for people and the rights of people who are gay and lesbian. And so I felt, as an ordained minister in the Reformed Church, quite comfortable actually introducing this, although I was certainly lonely among my colleagues in the Reformed Church. Conservative Christianity in Grand Rapids lined up pretty solidly in opposition. Maybe most disappointing was the opposition of African American clergy, who then and still today many refuse to accept this as the modern civil rights leading edge, that there is a civil rights issue at stake here, but stood up and clergy after clergy spoke in opposition to the ordinance. So that was extremely disappointing for me. I was within my own faith tradition. I was roundly castigated, and as a matter of fact, not too long after that, you start seeing heresy trials in the Reformed Church in America for people, clergy who were supportive of gay rights, certainly one of the reasons why, among others, I left the Reformed Church and moved my ordination back to the church of my upbringing, the United Church of Christ.
Yeah. And you spoke about how, because of your public position on it, your stance, your advocacy for including that gender orientation into the ordinance, that you obviously you received some flack. You were in some ways even targeted, and as I mentioned earlier when we were talking, we were looking at a Channel 13 news story from the '91 public hearing, where you even kind of state somewhat that reality from the commission seat, that you were receiving, letters and calls of people who were not happy with that kind of decision. I mean, as somebody who I would assume would consider themselves an ally on LGBT struggles, what did that kind of vocal opposition do to your own kind of resolve in terms of why you felt like it was important to maintain that stand?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, let me say that with now coming up on 16 years and serving in public office, 8 as a commissioner, 8 as the mayor, I certainly know that on any given issue, on any given day, I'm going to have a certain number of people that are with me and a certain number that are against me. And so you come to accept that, and you accept the public criticism that often comes with opposition, and that's part of our democratic process. What was different in this one for me than any other issue that I've faced in 16 years is the use of that people made of their Christian faith to oppose me and the position I was taking on this, and the virulence of the opposition. I have only once in 16 years taken a letter that I received, put it in a plastic sleeve, and delivered it to the police office, police department because it was a threatening letter. It was threatening my safety, my person, myself, my life, and I've never had to do that at any other time on any other issue. So it was this virulent, angry opposition where we saw what I think is the worst of our faith tradition come out in people. And the way you phrased the question to me was interesting because it gives me a chance to reflect on what that did to me, and it absolutely did strengthen my resolve and strengthen my backbone so that we could come back then at a later date after we'd had a change in city commission composition, introduce it again, knowing full well what we were going to face the second time around, and that time have it pass.
And that eventually did happen then in the spring of '94, also by a 4-3 vote. And do you remember, I mean, I think it was the same three folks who, well, there was three folks who had voted against it that continued to vote against it.
There was a change of one seat.
Yeah.
There was a change of one
Yeah.
seat on the commission, and actually it's a very interesting story because the LGBT community got behind candidate Eric Williams, coming out of a fairly conservative Christian African American experience, but they said, "We'll work for you, but we want your support on this when the time comes." And good to his word, and in the face of enormous opposition from his own faith community, Eric Williams, who had replaced Lou Merriweather in that election, cast an important vote that, along with Commissioners Samuelson, Mayor Logie, and Commissioner Heartwell, gave us the 4 votes we needed to pass it.
I was looking the other day at a chronological history of cities that have adopted similar ordinances, and Grand Rapids actually is one of the first in the country to really adopt it. In fact, in '94, another city adopted it, the city of San Francisco, which people would
same year.
think maybe San Francisco would have been way ahead of Grand Rapids on that regard. So in some ways, that's sort of very interesting. But I'm just wondering, since then, since you've acted as a commissioner and now as a mayor for several terms, what concrete difference do you think it made, or has made, or continues to make, by having that as a part of the city's anti-discrimination language? You know, when it comes to push to shove, what evidence do we have, or what sense do you have that it really has made Grand Rapids a better place to be?
On the one hand, it is only a symbolic ordinance, and we all understood that at the time, and I still understand it today. Until the state adds sexual orientation to the protected categories for enforcement, it's only a symbol. But symbols are important. We know that. I mean, those of us raised in any faith tradition know how important symbols are to what we believe and how we live our lives. So I today continue to consider it a very important ordinance in the city of Grand Rapids because of what it says about who we are. We are a community that is open and affirming, a community that is welcoming, a community that accepts difference, and doesn't simply tolerate it, but endorses or embraces, maybe is a better word, the differences that come, whether in race or gender. I'd like to be able to say that you could that Grand Rapids is measurably more, measurably less biased today than we were. I don't know that that's true. I'm convinced that this struggle is a long haul. It's a marathon, and we're at the earliest stages yet of that marathon. But when you look at some of the successes that we're experiencing now around the country, where states are adopting same-gender marriage statutes. It's encouraging. I think all of this work that went on in the 90s and even certainly before, but that has brought us to a point where we can now begin and continue building on those successes. So it's very important at the level of its symbolic importance. We've had few tests before our Community Relations Commission, but nonetheless, that is a body that will hear complaints or discriminatory complaints. They know that that's as far as it can go, and that there cannot be enforcement because the body for enforcing that is the State Civil Rights Commission, and it does not include sexual orientation or its protected classes.
Right. Well, maybe one final question, George, because this project is part of the larger sort of People's History of Grand Rapids sort of project, and we're hoping that 20, 30 years down the road that people will use this, look back at this to see what our own history learned from that. And as somebody who has taken a stand on this issue and who's clearly an ally of the LGBT community, what might you say to a young person, a high school student who might be watching this in a civics class, about the importance of, even if an issue doesn't directly affect you, in that if I identify as heterosexual, and what difference does it matter to me whether or not people of other orientations have certain rights or not? What words would you share with young people who are grappling with, why should I care about something like this if it doesn't really directly affect me?
Yeah. Well, I believe that this is a matter of fundamental justice, human justice. It's about how we live together in community and recognize the rights of others. I mean, the thing that distinguishes us from brutal, savage societies is that we honor the role and the place in society of minority groups, individuals, and we protect them with certain rights. So to any young person listening to this 20 years from now, looking at the funny way that mayors used to dress back in the olden days, I would say that in any time, in any age, justice is about caring for the rights of those who are on the margins of society. And clearly at this time in our history, gay and lesbian people are on the margins of our society. They're not protected by our laws today. They're not given the rights of marriage that heterosexuals are. That's wrong. That has to change. And if people, if only people in the minority stand up and say this is wrong, it will never be enough. The civil rights movement was successful in part because it had strong and charismatic black leaders who stood up, but its strength came from the way that the that the white community nationally, white clergy and individuals all over this country got behind it and said, you know what, that is wrong. We've got to change our laws. That's what's needed today.
Great, okay.
I have a question. Did anyone seek your counsel or advice when it came to the Holland ordinance that was passed? Do you have any colleagues there that said, George, I need to talk to you about this? Was there any perspective that you were asked to give on?
No.
And was there any backlash after the ordinance passed here? Because, you know, we've interviewed almost 60 people, right? And we're also including the Grand Valley community. And there, of course, are stories of funders withdrawing support if they passed the benefits, same-sex benefits issues.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, we spoke to the dean of, what is Wendy?
Wendy.
Wendy's dean of what?
Wendy
Wimmer.
Wimmer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she was on the committee that was in charge of the design building of the, you know, the medical center.
Uh-huh.
And that was, if you continue on this, was there anything like that in Grand Rapids that happened to, you know, the backlash?
Yeah.
Jeff,
Well-
can you ask the question and then you could just?
I'll talk to Jeff.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
Just so on the mic gets it,
Okay.
I'll ask the question, is that, you know, was there any response from any sector, any backlash, because the city of Grand Rapids, you know, in '94 did adopt this, whether that was, you know, political backlash, economic backlash, any other kind of backlash that you could recall or could identify?
At the time that I was on the city commission when all of this action took place, I was also pastor at Heartside Ministries in downtown Grand Rapids, working with the homeless community, and supported in large measure, as I recall, something like 60% of our financial support came from congregations and individuals within the Reformed Church in America, the church that I was ordained in at the time, as were my two clergy colleagues at that time. There were absolutely there was a financial consequence to my involvement in this. Congregations that had been supportive of Heartside Ministry, even though there wasn't a direct connection, saw this as an opportunity to voice their opposition by removing their funding. We took a hit in funding at the time. The other interesting piece of history was the opposition that was mounted through Reverend John Williams and the ballot initiative that, as I recall, secured more than enough signatures to put this on the ballot. And then the Reverend Smith turned in his ballots a day too late after the filing deadline, and so it never came back before a vote. I'd like to call that divine providence. I suspect he might have a different perspective.
Right. Yeah, when we were speaking with Reverend Doug Van Dorn, he talked about that effort to put it on the ballot and said that apart from it coming in a day late, that there was the group that was organizing around Reverend Williams, there was also some outside support and influence to provide some funding for that campaign to go forward.
I think that's right. The American Family Association, as I recall, was actively involved in that, both writing checks and promoting among their network of people in the community. There was, but by like token, there was an important group that organized and met at Plymouth Congregational Church during that period of time to combat this effort on the part of Reverend Williams and to strategize for a campaign and to raise money for a campaign after assuming that he got his ballots certified. So it was, I mean, both sides were, I would say, were strong. Our side didn't have the outside money coming in that their side did, but a great group of people to pull together to defend this important ordinance that we had in Grand Rapids.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks, George, for your time. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank
Yeah.
you. It's fun to think about it and talk about it again, too. I'm grateful.
Yeah.